Her name was Evelyn Harper. She had come west with hope in her chest and a ring on her finger. A schoolteacher from Ohio, promised to a man who swore he'd protect her. But when the raiders struck, he ran. So did the preacher. So did every man who had promised to stand tall. They left her to die with the rest, but she didn't die. She fought her way through the flames, pulled the children from a burning wagon, and carried them across the scorched ground while bullets tore the air around her. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to look at. It was the spring of 1867. The wind smelled of ash. The sky hung low over the Wyoming territory, heavy with silence and smoke. That's when she heard it, the slow, steady rhythm of hooves. Out of the haze rode a stranger, a cowboy with a torn hat, a worn rifle, and eyes that had seen too much. He said nothing at first, only looked at her like he recognized something in her that he had lost in himself. Long ago, he didn't come to save her. He came because something was pulling him west, and now, so was she. They would walk together into a land where no law could protect them. Only grit, instinct, and heart. What happened next would test their souls and leave a mark on the frontier forever. Dry Creek, Wyoming Territory, spring, 1867. The wind in Dry Creek carried more than dust. It carried old secrets, tired prayers, and the bitter scent of sweat-soaked horses. The town sat crooked on the edge of the world, 30 buildings if you counted the falling ones, and not a single tree in sight. Evelyn Harper awoke before the roosters crow, the sky still dark and heavy. She slept above the livery in a loft no bigger than a hog pen. The boards creaked beneath her step, and the hay beneath her blanket poked through like needles. Cold mornings came hard, and the fire rarely lasted the night. She pulled on her boots, scuffed, cracked and near giving up, and made her way down to feed the animals. The smell of manure greeted her like an old companion. She moved quiet, hands practiced, eyes sharp. No one thanked her, but the horses did. Least they didn't whisper behind her back. The townsfolk called her the firewoman, not out of respect. Out of fear. They remembered the convoy that never made it past Devil's Spine. They remembered the smoke that curled into the sky for 2 days. And they remembered the woman who walked out of it with 2 children, barefoot and bloodied, like she'd wrestled death and kept walking. But they didn't invite her in, didn't offer her kindness. She swept the livery stalls, lifted bales twice her weight, and cooked for herself when there was something to cook. Her hands were rough now, same hands that once wrote poems on clean white paper back in Ohio. Now, they knew the weight of a shovel and the bite of splinters. Men stared, women whispered. "She's cursed," they said. She walked out while the rest burned. Maybe she started it. She never answered. She didn't need to. Evelyn had learned long ago that words were wasted on fools. The preacher's wife had once offered her bread and scripture. Evelyn took the bread, left the scripture, and never came back. She believed in fire more than heaven now. Fire had never lied to her. Mr. Beale, who owned the livery, let her stay in exchange for work. He was a mean man with red gums and tobacco teeth. His laugh came easy, but without kindness. He didn't hit her, but his eyes were like sticky hands, always reaching where they shouldn't. Still, Evelyn endured. What choice did she have? Each evening she sat alone in the loft, chewing stale bread, watching the sky fade from gold to bruised purple. The stars came out slow, one by one, like they were scared of the dark too. Then came the day it all shifted. She was hauling water from the well, the rope biting her palms, when she saw the dust cloud first. Not wind, not wild horses. A rider. He came slow, steady, like he wasn't in a hurry to reach whatever end was waiting. His coat hung long, dust-covered. His hat shadowed his face, and he rode like he'd done it in his sleep 100 times before. The town went still. Doors didn't close, but they leaned. Men watched from behind curtains. The saloon's piano stopped mid-note. He passed by Evelyn without a word, but something in his silence spoke louder than a shout. He wasn't a man looking for trouble. He was a man it followed. Mr. Beale spat and muttered, Ain't nothing but another saddle tramp. He'll be gone by sunup." Evelyn said nothing. That night, as the wind tugged at the shutters and the fire sputtered low, she returned to the loft and found something on the floorboards. A letter. No seal. No name. She stared at it like it might bite. No one in Dry Creek wrote to her. No one had reason to. She unfolded it with careful fingers. The paper was worn, the ink faded but firm. "There's work west of here, real work, a place called Hollow Ridge. They need folks who don't scare easy. You've been through fire. That's more than most. If you're tired of scraping through the dust, come find me. Ask for Jay." That was it. No promise. No kindness. Just direction. Like a hand held out in silence. Evelyn folded the letter and tucked it into her boot. She didn't smile. But her heart did something it hadn't in a long while. It leaned forward, outskirts of Hollow Ridge. Wyoming Territory, 1867. The sun hung low, casting long red shadows across the hard-packed earth as Evelyn Harper approached the ranch gates. The boards were worn, one side crooked, the iron latch rusted. Past the gate, fields stretched wide, and lonely, fenced in by split-rail wood and silence. The mule beneath her moved slow, dust caking its legs, hooves thudding steady on the dry path. Her bonnet flapped in the wind, her coat hung loose from long days of wear. She sat upright, eyes forward, jaw tight. She'd come far, and she hadn't come to turn back. The house appeared at the rise, a plain wooden structure, 2 stories, a porch shaded by overhanging beams. Smoke curled from the chimney. A windmill creaked behind it, steady and tired. On the porch stood a man, tall, shoulders square beneath a worn duster. Hat pulled low, boots planted like he owned the very dirt. He didn't move as she rode in, just watched. Like a wolf does when it isn't hungry but still curious. Evelyn dismounted and tied the mule to a split post. She dusted her palms on her skirt and walked to the base of the porch. "You sent word," she said, voice firm but low. "So I came." The man didn't blink. "Didn't reckon you would." "You don't reckon much, do you?" He leaned on. "The post. Most folks don't ride into my land without a reason, and I ain't had a woman here since my mother died." "I ain't most folks," she said. A pause. He took the toothpick from his lips and squinted. "Name's Jack Remington." "I know," she replied. "I said I needed a hand. Never said I needed trouble." "Then we're both in luck. I didn't bring any." His eyes moved slow over her. Boots, hem, hands, face, judging, weighing. He nodded once. "1 week. You work, you stay. You slack, you ride. That's how it's done out here." "I've known worse trades," she answered. Behind them, a stable door creaked open. An old hand, gray-whiskered and long-faced, leaned out, wiped his brow with a cloth and spat. "That her?" Jack didn't turn. "That's her." The old man grunted. "Don't look like she can lift a hay fork, let alone wrangle a steer." Evelyn spoke without turning. "You talking to me or just making noise?" The old man chuckled and went back inside. From the road, 2 women stood by a water pump, buckets in hand, whispering. One of them nudged the other with an elbow. Evelyn didn't look, but she felt it, the way small towns breathe through gossip and spit through smiles. Jack opened the door behind him and stepped aside. "You'll take the room off the kitchen. There's wood to chop, tack to clean, feed to haul. No coddling, no hand-holding. I didn't ask for either." Inside was dim, the air filled with dry wood, iron, and faint tobacco. The room he pointed to was bare. Cot, stool, basin. "You eat after the day's work, not before. If you get cold, there's a blanket trunk in the barn." Evelyn nodded. "And if I get burned, you'll heal. Or you won't." She set her bundle by the cot and looked out the small window. The sky beyond was the color of blood and ash, stretched thin over endless land. Jack stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Why'd you really come?" he asked. Evelyn didn't turn. "Same reason as any creature. Shelter, food, a place to stand." "Any woman come riding in alone has more to her story than she tells." She faced him. And any man living alone on dead land has more wounds than he shows. He stared, long and hard, then turned and walked out. The door shut behind him. Outside, the prairie winds howled like an old dog left behind. Evelyn sat, down on the cot, fingers still dirt-stained from the trail, heart steady but worn. She didn't come here for kindness. She came because there was nowhere else left to go. Remington Ranch, Hollow Ridge. Late autumn 1867 mornings came hard on the Remington Ranch. Frost kissed the fields before dawn, and the wind cut straight through wool. Evelyn rose before the rooster's crow, boiled water over the hearth, and wrapped her fingers around the worn handle of the kettle like it might anchor her to this earth. She and Jack lived under the same roof, but spoke no more than a dozen words a day. He rode out early, eyes shaded beneath his hat brim, saddlebag slung, rifle strapped behind him. When he passed her on the porch, he gave a curt nod. No warmth, no malice, just space wide enough to keep a secret between. Evelyn worked the barn. She split wood, brushed horses, mended torn tack. Her hands, once soft from stitching, turned rough, with callus. She never complained. Not once. And Jack noticed, though he never said so. At supper, they ate in silence. She spooned stew into a tin bowl, sat at the end of the long table, and stared out the window while he read the day's grain ledger. Sometimes the silence stretched too long. Sometimes it hummed with things unsaid. The only company most days came from Silas, the old ranch hand who watched everything with knowing eyes and a crooked grin. "She's tougher than she looks," Silas said one morning as Jack leaned against the corral fence. Jack didn't answer. "She don't flinch at hard work, and I ain't seen her drop a single chore." Still, Jack kept his eyes on the hills beyond. "I didn't bring her here for comfort." "No," Silas muttered, "but maybe she brought something you need anyhow." That night, the wind roared over the plains, rattling the shutters like ghosts wanting in. Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter, watching the fire die low. She thought of her sister, buried back in Missouri, of the last home she'd lost, of all the places she'd been turned away from, simply for being too alone, too strong, too strange. She heard Jack's boots cross the floor above her, slow, heavy, pacing like a man with things chasing him that didn't have feet. The next morning, a visitor arrived, a young woman, cheeks red with cold, riding a piebald mare. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, a dress too fine for chores, and lips that curved like she owned the land. "Why, Jack Remington," she called from her saddle. "You still breathing out here or just growing roots?" Jack stepped onto the porch, arms folded. "Didn't expect to see you again, Millie." "Didn't expect you to take in hired help," she said, glancing toward Evelyn, who stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. "Polite." "Mornin', ma'am," Millie just smirked. "Well, don't that make things interestin'? New face, new rumors." Jack shot a look toward Evelyn. "Millie was raised in town. We've known each other a long while." "I figured," Evelyn replied, calm as dusk. After Millie rode off, the wind picked up again. Jack stood quiet for a long time, hands on his hips, face unreadable. "She talk like that to every stranger?" Evelyn asked, tossing another log into the woodpile. Jack shook his head. "She don't see you as a stranger." "Then I reckon she sees me as a threat." Later that week, Evelyn was hauling water from the creek when she heard a horse whinny. Then, a shout. She dropped the pail and ran. Jack lay in the corral, dirt on his coat, blood on his sleeve. A young colt stood wild-eyed beside him, snorting and kicking. Evelyn slid to her knees beside him, breath sharp. "You're hurt," Jack grunted. "Colt spooked, threw me, caught me with the hoof on the way down." She tore a strip from her skirt hem and pressed it to the bleeding gash. "You need a doctor," she said. "I need whiskey and thread. That's all." She held the cloth tighter. "You're stubborn." His eyes caught hers. "And you're not?" For the first time in weeks, the silence between them softened. "Why do you push everyone away?" she asked. Jack looked past her toward the hills. "Because the last time I didn't, I buried a ring and a child in the same winter." Evelyn swallowed. Her hand trembled just slightly. "You're not the only one with graves behind you," she whispered. They didn't speak after that. But when she helped him to his feet, he didn't pull away. And when she stitched his arm by lantern light that night, her fingers never once faltered. He watched her from the corner of his eye, the soft curve of her brow, the dirt on her cheek, the way her mouth held steady even as her eyes glistened. Something cracked in the cold air between them. Not loud, but enough. Remington Ranch. Winter edges closer. 1867. The days had turned colder, on the ridge. Snow had not yet fallen, but the sky hung heavy like it was thinking about it. Evelyn wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders and watched Jack from the barn doorway. His arm, still healing, moved stiffly, but he never asked for help. They hadn't spoken much since that night by the firelight, not about the wound, not about what was said. But something had shifted. She felt it in the quiet way he waited for her to walk alongside him, in how he left the porch lantern burning if she worked late, in the way his eyes lingered on her hands when they trembled from the cold. Then came the rider. Late one afternoon, the sound of hooves echoed through the hollow like trouble galloping straight from memory. Jack stepped onto the porch just as the figure dismounted. The man was lean, sharp-eyed, wearing a union coat dulled from wear. His boots were caked with miles, and his voice had a bite when he said, "You still owe me, Remington." Evelyn watched. From the side of the barn, heart thudding like war drums, Jack didn't flinch. "Thought you were dead, Harper." "You left me for it," the man replied, slow and cold. "In Tennessee, 63. When that barn burned and the Rebs circled back, I waited. You never came. I was hit. I nearly bled out 2 miles south. You made it out. I didn't. Spent 2 years in their prison camp while you healed and disappeared." Evelyn stepped forward, unable to stay hidden. "Jack?" Jack looked at her like she wasn't supposed to be there. Harper followed his gaze. "Well now, you finally let someone close. That don't look like the Jack I knew." Jack's jaw tensed. "What do you want, Harper?" "Reckoning. You walked out on a pact. We were brothers then. You broke it. I didn't choose to leave you. But you did." That night, Evelyn didn't speak at supper. Jack sat across from her, silent, brooding. The stew cooled between them. "You knew he might come back," she said quietly. "I tried to bury all that back there," he muttered. "Didn't reckon it'd claw its way out again. Why didn't you tell me?" Jack looked at her hard. "What good would it have done?" "You let me care," she whispered, then shut me out like a door in a storm, his fist clenched against the table. "I don't owe you the blood in my past." "No," she said, rising, "but you owed me the truth." She stepped back from the table, heart aching. "You said I wasn't a stranger anymore." "You're not," he said, standing. "Then stop treating me like one." Jack's eyes softened, just for a moment, but then the wall came back. "You want to leave, Evelyn. I won't stop you." She stared at him. "That ain't what I asked." But he turned, walked out into the cold night, and didn't look back. Evelyn stood in the kitchen alone, breath caught in her throat like a bird in a snare. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, bending them like sorrow bends the soul. By morning, she had packed her small satchel. Silas watched from the stable, shaking his head. "You sure about this?" he asked. She paused, then nodded. "He's fighting ghosts that won't let go, and I can't live where I'm not trusted." Silas touched the brim of his hat. "Then, may the road be kinder than this place has been." As she rode out past the ridge, she didn't cry. Not then. But Jack, standing at the window, watched the dust from her horse disappear into the horizon, and he knew what it meant to lose someone while still breathing. Remington Ranch, Northern Colorado Territory. Winter, 1867. The storm didn't roll in. It thundered down like fury bottled too long. By sundown, The wind howled across the plains, lifting grit and broken branches, slamming shutters against the farmhouse like fists. The horses bucked in the corral, frightened and wild-eyed. Silas hollered through the sleet as he tried to tie them down. Jack stood at the barn door, coat soaked through, jaw set like granite. And Evelyn was out there. She had left that morning with only her satchel and a mind set on distance, but she hadn't made it far. Jack knew the terrain too well. The pass to Mill Creek was narrow and washed out in weather like this. He cursed under his breath, threw his rifle over his shoulder, and mounted his horse. "Where you going?" Silas called, shielding his eyes. "She ain't made for storms like this," Jack growled. "She's still out there." The trail was half mud, half memory. Jack rode hard beneath the fury of the heavens, his eyes narrowed against the sting of wind. Every bend in the canyon felt like a punch to his chest, every clap of thunder like the war drums of his past, chasing him down again. And then he saw it. A horse, riderless, tangled near a fallen tree. He leapt down, heart galloping in his chest. "Evelyn!" No answer. He pushed through the underbrush, hands clawing at bramble and ice, until he found her near the creek bed, half conscious, her cloak soaked, her cheek bloodied from a fall. Her lips moved faintly. "Jack, I got you," he said, voice low, fierce. "You're all right. I got you." He lifted her carefully, wrapped his coat around her, and carried her to the horse. She shivered violently, her fingers clutching his shirt like she didn't trust the world beneath her feet. Back at the ranch, Silas had the fire roaring and blankets ready. Evelyn lay near the hearth, her hair wet and clinging to her face, steam rising from her clothes. Jack knelt beside her, watching every breath, every flutter of her lashes like it was life itself. When her eyes opened, they were glassy and lost. "You came for me," she whispered. "I never should have let you leave," he replied. Silence settled between them, thick and warm like the flicker of the fire. "I didn't know if I mattered," she said, her voice cracking. "You shut me out." He looked down. "I ain't good at letting people in." "I never asked you to be good. I asked you to be honest." Jack took her hand gently, his rough thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You do matter, more than I know what to do with." Her breath caught. "You don't have to say that," she whispered. "I ain't," he said. "I'm just finally saying what's true." She turned her head toward him. Her eyes, tired and shining, searched his face. "I was scared," she said. "I still am." He nodded. "Me too." Another long pause, then quietly. "I thought." "I lost you," he said, voice gravel soft. "You almost did," she whispered back. He leaned in, forehead nearly touching hers, but the space between them held. Quiet, pulsing, unresolved. No kiss, no vow, just a breath shared between two wounded hearts. Outside, the wind began to die down. Inside, the fire crackled gently, casting gold across the room. They didn't say another word, but in the stillness, something shifted again. Not in grand confession, but in something deeper, trust. Remington Ranch, late winter, 1867. The cold that settled over the ridge was bitter enough to bite through thick coats and stubborn skin. But inside the weather-beaten walls of the Remington homestead, a different kind of chill had set in, one colder than the wind that whipped the plains. Since the storm, things between Jack and Evelyn had been quieter, softer, yet that silence carried a weight neither dared break. That calm was shattered the day Samuel Price rode into town. Price was everything Jack wasn't. Tall, smooth-talking, and dressed in fine clothes that made the townsfolk's eyes widen. A man with money, a reputation, and a sharp smile that unsettled Evelyn more than she cared to admit. He came to the saloon first, buying drinks for the locals and telling stories of gold strikes and new beginnings out west. Word spread quick, like wildfire. And when he asked Evelyn for a dance, eyes turned sharper than knives. Jack saw it too. He watched from the porch as Price bowed low before her, offering a ring as if she were a prize to be claimed. Evelyn's face betrayed nothing, but Jack's gut twisted with something fierce and unfamiliar. That evening, Evelyn found Jack sitting alone by the fire, staring into the embers like they held all the answers. "We can't keep pretending." "This is easy," she said, voice steady but low. Jack didn't look up. "She's got money, a fancy life. She could leave this dust and cold behind." Jack finally met her eyes. "I never promised you a life that's easy. But you promised you'd stay." Jack's jaw clenched. "I'm thinking of selling the ranch. Moving on." Her heart stuttered. "Sell it. What about us?" "We don't have us if I'm just holding on because of some promise." Evelyn turned away, feeling the weight of every whispered word from townfolk who saw her as little more than a burden, an outsider who couldn't tame the land or the men who lived on it. At the church meeting the next day, old Mrs. Harding shook, her head with sympathy. "You'd do well to leave, girl. This ain't no place for a woman without kin." The whispers followed her like shadows. Later that afternoon, Evelyn spotted Jack talking with Samuel Price near the livery stable. They laughed, too easy, too warm. Her breath caught. "Jack," she called, voice tight. He glanced over but said, "Nothing." In that moment, Evelyn felt the years of loneliness snap like dry twigs. She didn't wait for explanation. She rode hard into the dusk, tears burning her cheeks. Jack found her that night by the river, cold and silent, the moon just a sliver above. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You're selling the ranch and letting Price walk in like I'm some prize to be won," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "You're wrong." "But that's what it looks like." "I'm scared, Evelyn. Scared I'll lose you. Scared I'm not enough." Her voice cracked. "You should have told me that." He stepped closer, but the space between them stretched, wider than ever. "I don't know how to fix this," Jack admitted. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Maybe some things can't be fixed." Jack looked away, shadows hiding the hurt in his eyes. They stood there, two souls broken by silence and pride, the night pressing down like a final verdict. Neither moved, neither spoke. They were gone from each other long before the dawn. Remington Ranch, early spring, 1867. The dawn crept slow across the prairie, soft light spilling over the hills and melting away the night's harsh shadows. But inside Jack Remington's heart, the darkness had only grown. He sat alone on the porch, boots resting on the wooden rail, eyes fixed on the distant ridge where Evelyn had disappeared days before. The house felt empty, colder than the winter. That had just passed. Memories came unbidden, quiet moments he'd tried to bury. The morning she had tied his worn boots, hands steady despite the ache behind her eyes. The night she sat by the fire, humming low songs from her childhood, soft as the wind through the cottonwoods. Her kindness, like rain breaking a long drought. His loyalty, the promise he never voiced but carried in every breath. Jack stood abruptly, voice rough but firm. "She's not leaving this land without me." He saddled his horse and rode hard toward the town, heart pounding as fast as the pounding hooves. The town square was stirring, folks going about their day unaware of the storm that rode in on Jack Remington's broad shoulders. He found her outside, the general store, standing tall despite the weight of whispered judgment. Evelyn's eyes flashed with surprise and something softer, hope. "Evelyn," Jack called, voice steady but breaking just so. She looked away, lips pressed tight. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking with every word. "I was wrong," he said plainly. "Wrong to let you go, wrong to doubt what we have." She shook her head slowly. "You made it seem like I didn't matter." "No," he whispered. "You matter more than anything I've known." Around them, townsfolk paused, watching the reunion unfold like a long-awaited rain on parched earth. Jack dropped to one knee, hat in hand. "I can't live without you. Not this life, not any life." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, her guard finally breaking. "I'm scared," she said, voice trembling. "Me too," Jack admitted. "But I'm willing to face it, if you'll stay." She reached out, taking his hand, fingers trembling with relief and newfound courage. "Stay," she whispered back. In that moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Two broken souls mended by truth and trust, standing together, against the fading light of a hard land. Remington Ranch, late spring, 1867. The sun was low, painting the wide sky with streaks of amber and rose. The air held the soft scent of freshly turned earth and wild sage, a promise of life returning to the land after long months of cold and dust. Jack and Evelyn rode side by side, their horses' hooves kicking up small clouds of dry dirt as they crossed the familiar trail home. The Remington Ranch lay just beyond the ridge, weathered but standing strong, a stubborn beacon against the vast, untamed prairie. Word had spread fast through town. Some folks nodded with cautious hope, while others whispered behind cupped hands, casting sideways glances at the pair returning together. Mrs. Harding, standing on her porch, gave a rare smile. Maybe there's a chance for them after all. The house welcomed them like an old friend. Evelyn dismounted first, brushing dust from her skirts, eyes bright with a mixture of relief and quiet joy. Jack stepped close, reaching for her hand, as they moved toward the garden patch behind the barn. Together, they knelt in the soft soil, planting rows of corn and beans, seeds of hope to grow alongside their healing hearts. Their hands brushed, lingering just a moment longer than needed. Evelyn glanced up at Jack, her cheeks warmed by the fading light. "Feels like we're building more than just a farm," she said softly. Jack nodded, lips curving into a rare, gentle smile. Something worth fighting for. That evening, as the stars blinked awake above the wide-open plains, they sat by the fire pit, a blanket wrapped around their shoulders. The crackling flames danced shadows across their faces as they spoke of futures once only dreamed. No words were needed to fill the silence. It was enough to simply be near, to know they had found a place where both could belong. Days turned into weeks. Neighbors stopped by with baskets of fresh eggs and warm bread, sharing laughter and stories that slowly wove Evelyn and Jack back into the fabric of the town. Preparations began quietly. Whispers of a wedding floated through the air like drifting petals. Evelyn's eyes sparkled with a light Jack hadn't seen since the day she first arrived. One evening, as twilight settled, Jack took Evelyn's hand and led her to the highest hill overlooking the ranch. They stood side by side, watching the sky deepen into a tapestry of stars. Jack's voice was low but steady. "This time, you're not going anywhere." Evelyn smiled, her heart full and sure. Home at last. The winds had carried many stories across the plains, but few as true as the one of Jack and Evelyn. Two souls, battered by time and trial, who found in each other a reason to stand tall when the world seemed determined to break them. She came with the weight of loneliness and loss. He, with walls built from pride and pain. Yet, through the dust and silence, through the long, hard days, they learned what it meant to heal, not just the land they tended, but the hearts they carried. Their love was not the kind born of fairy tales or easy endings. It was forged in the quiet moments, the shared burdens, and the courage to face the unknown hand in hand.